The problem is I don't understand what it means to be a physicist, to be a scientist, and not to be a realist. Of course, you can discuss about reality of laws and whether time flows, and there are subtle, philosophical, scientific questions. But obviously, if you study physics, you want to study the world, and you assume that there is a world and it has properties, and you want to know these properties. I mean, I just biology. I mean, but I don't think there are many idealists in biology or in chemistry. I mean, just the idealism sneaks in physics because of quantum mechanics, and then also maybe because people are bothered by the sort of abstract, the fact what does force mean, and does the Hamiltonian guide the particle. I mean, people have been bothered by this question ever since Newton, and then they try to find idealistic solution, saying, "Oh, no, 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 it's not in the world; it's all in our heads, it's all in our head." I don't think it makes sense, because if it's in our head, then why do you bother with experiments and so on? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. But idealism, even though it doesn't make sense, I mean, I think Diderot was saying that this is the most foolish philosophy, the most difficult to combat.
Right. That is true. Like, even in, say, biology or cognitive science, where you would think that these things would sneak in more, um, people don't really take an idealist viewpoint. They take a mechanistic viewpoint. Like, you want to understand some qualia and come up with a mechanism that's perfectly natural and that assumes a perfectly natural world. That's fine, but I don't know why in quantum mechanics specifically people tend to go that route sometimes.
Oh, because of the role of measurements. I mean, if measurements are central, observations are central, observer is central to the physical theory, then it has an obvious path towards idealism, because what is a measurement? You could say it's just a measuring device, just a physical measuring device. But then you have the problem that if you follow Schrödinger's equation for the whole system, then you get into the superposition, and you don't know what that means. You see, you get the psi cat alive, the wave function of the cat alive plus the wave function of the cat dead, and that's sort of then people start scratching their head and say, what does that mean? What does that mean? But as I point out, I mean, even the wave function of the cat alive or the wave function of the cat dead, even separately, I don't know what meaning they have. And so that's my main problem. The problem is the meaning of quantum mechanics, not the problem of just the problem of the measurement. I mean, the problem is that there is the centrality of measurement is unsatisfactory for any physical theory.
Yeah, but I mean, do you think there's almost like these two realms of discussion? Like, one is legitimate discussion in physics, mathematics, philosophy that's sort of genuinely dealing with the problems, and there might be disagreement, but it's still trying to understand the problem. And then there's this other set that wants to read a lot into quantum mechanics that isn't really there, like try to find a pathway to consciousness or all these things. Uh, they're both might be wrong in an ideal sense, but I feel like they're different in approach.
I mean, it seems to me that, you see, once you accept the centrality of measurement and observations, where do you stop? I mean, Victor was, of course, saying ultimately the problem is in consciousness. I mean, he didn't say that all the time, but he did suggest that. And of course, all the people on the mystical side, even more, even more, go even more into that. You have quantum healing, you have all kinds of mixing between Oriental philosophies and quantum mechanics and all that, which I discuss in my book in part. So there is this, you know, but I think the basic, I mean, I think if you can't blame the non-physicists for abusing quantum mechanics when you see all the things that the physicists have been saying. And that's what I think is a disaster. I find it, I go back to my student days. I mean, that's a very long time ago, but I still find it frustrating. You see, and of course, I was teaching quantum mechanics, but then I was asking the students when I was in university, saying, "Do you understand something to the whole business?" And then, of course, they was, "We want to pass the exam. We want to know how to compute the probability of the spin in that direction, if it is in that direction to start." I mean, they just wanted to pass to shut up and calculate. They didn't want to worry about these things. I mean, not all of them, but I guess it's a very natural reaction. I would understand that reaction completely, but But I found that very, very, very disappointing from the physics community that they don't seem to care about the meaning of their most fundamental theory. It seems to me that that is a very, very irrational attitude. And I found it seemed to me that if physicists are good for something, they should be guardians of rationality and not, and not, I'm sorry. So I think they should be guardians of rationality, and they are not.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. The responsibility should, I mean, if you don't tell students what it means, then you can't really blame them for seeking answers elsewhere, right?
Yeah. I mean, in general, I have a chapter in my book about the exploitation of quantum mechanics by non-scientists. But I mean, when you see what people have been saying, um, it is really not. You can't blame the non-scientists for what they or the philosophers for what have been saying by then saying about quantum mechanics, given what has been said by scientists. I think that's as simple as that. And I think the students can be forgiven, certainly forgiven, for being confused about the whole thing because nothing clear is being told. And they say, you see, as I say, the physicists now are not as dogmatic as they used to be, but uh, they don't bother to try to really have a clear picture. So they can say, oh, but maybe it's many words, that's all, maybe this, maybe that. You see, and because they don't think it true, the students don't know. You see, I think I say in my book that there should be at least three things that should be said. One is that there is a problem with quantum mechanics. It's not clear what it means. That's the minimum that you should do. The second thing is non-locality, because that's a theorem. Okay, it's not. I mean, it's not something which you can speculate about. And then explain that Bohm is a solution. Now, of course, people will say, "Oh, we don't like Bohm." Okay, you don't like Bohm, fine, but what do you like? I mean, what is your alternative? Okay, I mean, it's like on Facebook. I mean, it's just like many words. I mean, they don't like many words, but it seems to me that people, yeah, these are the three steps which I think an honest teacher should do. Anyway,
Like is a subjective judgment that doesn't.
yeah, yeah. The question, no, I think, yeah, but anyway, I don't know if the situation will improve. I'm not very optimistic because I don't think I don't think you see there is always the problem that people need to make careers. There is zero reward for even asking those questions. Very bright people who have been working in foundation of quantum mechanics like Ward Struve can't find a job. And I mean, not only him, but others. And I find that's a pity. You see, there is not even a 1% of, of jobs which are attributed to these kind of things. And they have to find jobs in philosophy or maybe in mathematics department, physics department. It's very, very difficult to find a job. Um, you know, I think I don't know how many people actually work in mathematics departments who are working on. I mean, Detlef was in mathematics. His students that I know are in mathematics. Shelley is in mathematics. Shelley Goldstein is in mathematics. Maudlin is in philosophy. Physics department, but it's strange because then of course, it's also very funny because it's, oh, we don't care, we only worry about applications, so on, so. And then they start discussing the early universe. Okay, what's the application of the early universe? Okay, I don't know. or whether the universe expands and contracts and all these things. I mean, what's the application of that?
No, you bring this up, but it's very true. People who dismiss the philosophical questions the most end up asking them casually without discipline.
Well, they ask questions which are, if not philosophical, I mean, they have to. I mean, for example, I don't agree, for example, that Bohmian mechanics is philosophy. I think Bohm wrote a completely physics paper, and Bell wrote physics paper, and the papers by Goldstein, Zangi were physics paper, etc. I mean, I think this is complete physics paper. What I might call philosophy is, but what is the status of the wave function? Is it a law, and what's the status of quantum equilibrium? Is that a law? Or is that or what is the nature of laws, and you take a Jungian view on laws, which I don't, but or more the approach of modeling, which I do. I mean, you see, this is then I would say I call that philosophy. I don't think you need to do the philosophy to. In my book, there are certain chapters on philosophy which I've added because it's part of the discussion, but you could take them out and just leave everything with the equations and so on, and that would be a physics book, in my opinion. But of course, people will say, that's philosophy. Oh, that's philosophy. No, it's not philosophy. It's just understanding what you're talking about.
What do you think the role of philosophy is then?
Oops. Well, I mean, maybe you won't like it, but Weinberg, of course, says that before the invention of the postal service, the whole of the nation state was to protect you from other nation states. I'm not sure that's true, but then he says the whole of philosophy is to protect yourself from other philosophies, from bad philosophies. And in a sense, I think it's partly true. In particular, protect yourself from idealistic philosophies, which are extremely common among philosophers, especially continental philosophers. But it seemed to me that it just also just clarifying concept. You see, I mean, it all depends. If you call Bohm philosophy, then Bohms are useful to clarify your concept. Now, I don't know. I don't have a fixed definition of what philosophy means. It seems to me I've always been interested in philosophy. By the way, I've read lots of philosophy, but probably more than most physicists. But I would not, you see, I wouldn't start with philosophy. I start with physics, and then you reflect. I mean, it's the book by Maudlin, The Metaphysics Within Physics. I mean, you start with physics, and then you reflect upon that in order to think about the status of laws and things like that. The good philosophy, at least since Newton would, I mean, at least I'm not talking about ethics and things like that, but philosophy is philosophy of nature, everything that's about ontology and metaphysics and so on starts with physics. Okay, and then of course you can start to think beyond what the physicists usually think about. Physicists usually don't think about the nature of space and time. You see, it's okay for physicists to take a naive attitude with respect to space, time, and these things, and just take the equations. And it would be okay for them to do the same thing in quantum mechanics if quantum mechanics made sense, but the usual thing does not make sense. And then, of course, you need to go beyond. But if you take the Bohm theory, then, of course, it's a physics theory. It just completes ordinary quantum mechanics, and that's it. But then, you can go beyond and ask philosophical questions.
But Maudlin, for example, as best as I can tell, constantly emphasizes philosophy, mathematics, and physics. But sometimes I kind of feel like it's kind of like the scientific method, where we can have a nice description of what it is, but in practice, it's very difficult to draw lines. And I'm not so sure there's really any point in drawing lines either, right?
Yeah, I don't think you. My friend Sokal had once a diagram with a line. You see, going from, of course, where he puts all the different theories. So he takes, for example, on the one hand, on the one extreme, you can have atomic theory, for example, which is well established. But then you can have string theory, which is somewhere in between. I'm not even sure where it is nowadays, but it's not at the end of the spectrum. And of course, at the other hand, he would put pseudoscience, homeopathy, and all the religions at the other end. Okay, with no empirical support. But there is a continuum. I mean, there is no demarcation as the positivists would have liked, or Popper would have liked to have, between science and pseudoscience. Especially because I think there's a lot of pseudoscience in what we call science. I mean, there's a sociological definition of science, which is what people do in the science department, but whether that fits any philosophical demarcation line, that I doubt.
What is your view of the positivist and the demarcation problem?
Well, again, it's a guide, you see. It's a guide. You don't have a fixed demarcation, but of course, if your theory, I mean, it's like this big thing about Popper, whether it's falsifiable. Obviously, it has to be falsifiable in some way, but of course, what counts as a falsification is very complicated. You could say Newton's theory has been falsified by the perihelion of Mercury in the 19th century. Nobody gave up Newton's theory for that reason, okay? The question is whether, because there was a lot of empirical support, and so that's why I think Popper is totally misguided. And the positivists, of course, they thought it was a question of meaning, but the meaning is, I certainly don't think the meaning are the means of verification. Meaning is a complicated notion, but I certainly don't think one can reduce it to, you know, the means of verification. So I don't have a demarcation line. As I say, there's a continuum between complete religion, mystical pseudoscience, etc., and well-established science.